Hello, everybody. This is Catholic Dad, episode number 223. Donald Trump, the modern day Constantine the Great. This is kind of a hard comparison, but I think it's probably adequate or historically accurate. So, Constantine, he was essentially one of the sons of St. Helena, and he was kind of a braggadocio, like ambitious dude that kind of wanted to take over the world. To put things in perspective, and I guess he was born in the late third century, and so Constantine was going to go take over Rome. Right, he had all this ambition. He wanted to go take over Rome because Rome became it was completely paganized. It was filthy. It was drunk on death, and it was persecuting Christians. It was the time of Diocletian's Christian persecution, where he was feeding them to bears and lions and whatever else, and having them kill each other within the Colosseum. And Constantine wanted to go over and take over Rome, and he wanted to become like the ruler of the world, essentially. Well, anyway, and he was very ambitious, but he was also pagan. He wasn't very Christian. What happened? Well, he was the year was 312. I guess he was probably 32 years old at that time, and he was marching toward Rome to take over Rome. And Maxentius was on the other side of Rome over the Milvian Bridge, and they were going to have this great battle. So, what is it? Constantine the Great, he's coming from Gaul, and Maxentius is going to keep Rome, and he doesn't want Constantine coming in. So Constantine, with all his great ambition, goes and looks toward the sky and sees a sign from God, and he essentially the next day he orders all the bronzesmiths and goldsmiths to affix these Christian symbols to their helmets so they could charge into battle. He didn't necessarily convert to Christianity at that point in time, but he did get a sign from God, and he knew he had to, go take over Rome and become the leader of the world, essentially, and do things right. Well, anyway, so what happened was Maxentius was on the other side of the Milvian Bridge, and there was a river in between them. And the night before the battle, Maxentius orders all his troops over the Milvian Bridge. Really kind of a great war blunder, probably the greatest war blunder in the history of mankind, and lines all his troops with their back to the river. And so when Constantine charged and they broke the charge, they slaughtered all of them, and they had no place to run. And they threw all the bodies in the water. So it was a great war battle for Constantine. He marched over the Milvian Bridge and then took Rome. And so anyway. And that was the year 312, and Constantine, I guess, 32 years old or whatever he was, kind of a young man, and he marches into Rome. And the following year, 313, he issues something called the Edict of Milan, which is incidentally essentially the United States Declaration of Independence, that we're all created equal, and we're endowed by our Creator with rights, and these rights mean freedom of worship and freedom of property. And so essentially, he took away the Diocletian persecution of the Christian people, and essentially made Christianity legal and said they're allowed to keep their own property. That's what they're allowed to do. And all of a sudden, people started worshiping on Sunday after that because they were now allowed to, because if you worship on Sunday before then, you'd be killed. Incidentally, just a little side note, the Seventh-day Adventists believe Constantine changed the day of worship. It wasn't actually that. What Constantine did was legalize Christianity so they can actually worship on the Christian Sabbath day of Sunday. He didn't change anything about the day of worship. And so then Christians started worshiping in public, and that's when Sunday, on the Sabbath day, and when they would worship. Anyway, another side note. So what happened? So with all his great ambition, he issues the Edict of Milan, and then he actually tries to inspire the cardinals and bishops within the Roman Catholic Church to call a council to end the Arian heresy, essentially that God wasn't true God, that there were many gods, and Christ wasn't the only one true God, three persons in one Trinity. And so that's the Arian heresy. And so the Council of Nicaea got called at the behest of Constantine the Great, or Constantine the First. And they ended the Arian heresy and created the Nicene Creed. So I think that's a pretty important inflection point in history. And at that point in time, Constantine was still probably pagan, but he converted, and he converted whether it was on his deathbed or a couple of years before he died. Who knows? The story is kind of a little variable, and I don't really have all the history on it. But so how is Constantine and Trump like each other? Well. Rome was kind of rotten and filthy. It was, depraved, sexually immoral. Families were breaking up. Homosexuality was everywhere. The culture was just degrading and rotten. That's one of them. And then number two was the deep state within Rome. The vetted generational political inculcation and essentially that it was just generational. You couldn't get into politics unless you were born into politics, and the corruption and the nepotism and the cronyism was just rife. And so here comes Donald Trump marching to Washington. And what is he overseeing right now? Well, he's overseeing the Epstein crisis, which is essentially he's taking on the entire deep state, all the people that are essentially been holding on to power for generations. This is going to be interesting. Constantine won that battle. He had to put some people to death. I don't know if Trump's going to do that, but he's certainly going to use the force of the state to get his way on this issue. The other thing is the depravity within the church and all the religious ambiguity going on. The Department of Justice, the DOJ, has investigated the Roman Catholic Church for its sexual crisis right now. And Donald Trump's actually overseeing that, essentially. And so he's cleaning up the filth and the depravity within the church. He's trying to clean up the filth and the depravity in society, but he's also taking on the establishment politics, much like Constantine did. And if he can do that, if he can actually take away the filth and the depravity and reinstitute new government like the Edict of Milan, that all people are created equal and they're down by the creators or certain inalienable rights, Donald Trump will be Constantine, or he will be the modern-day Constantine the Great. And so that's just a little bit of history for you. And, I know a lot of people don't like Donald Trump, but a lot of people didn't like Constantine either, because he was a thug, he was a pillager, he was a murderer, but he was also a great man at the end of the day. And he had a lot of people put to death, and he also killed a lot in battle. So maybe he wasn't the greatest man on the planet, but certainly he did drive culture in a good direction when he finally took over. And that's where Christendom eventually rose out of, the Diocletian persecutions, and Constantine finally legalizing Christianity for people to freely worship. I think we are in similar days to 312 AD right now, and Constantine's at the Milvian Bridge, and the deep state is crossing over the Milvian Bridge right now. The battle's going to be epic, and the slaughter's going to be even better than it was the first time around. And so this is Catholic Dad making you think about it. Please like or subscribe, get the Mass, and pray the Daily Rosary. God bless you all.